Hello and welcome to another video. As you can probably tell from the leaves, the scenery behind me, we're right in the middle of autumn here in the UK. And this is a great time of year to start thinking about building those firelighting skills and extending them further. Summer firelighting is more just to have to cook something or for atmosphere, but during the winter it's a really good way to keep people warm, keep fingers moving and keep people outdoors. So we're going to take a look at some tinders today that to move you on from, say, if you're just used to using cotton wool as the tinder source that you use with your children or the people you're working with. We're going to see if we can extend that further and start talking about some other tinders that you can take a look at, that you can use and then you can use with your groups to move that learning further forward and start introducing different concepts. So if that sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, then keep watching. I'll be right back after this intro. So before we get into looking at our different tinders, it's probably worth taking a moment to talk about what tinders are. So tinders are, in general, the materials that you use to take a spark that usually you will generate as the bushcraft, the firelight or whatever, and then take it onto a flame that's big enough that will light your smallest piece of fuel, which is your kindling. So if we think of cotton wool as our tinder, then we would go up to really thin twigs for our kindling, and then would go up to bigger sticks and bigger sticks until we have a proper fire. So it's using that initial, if you want to think of it in terms of physics, it's the introduction of energy. So whether it's a lighter, some matches, a bow drill, a fire steel, you are introducing energy to the system, and you need something that will then light from that initial introduction of energy. And one of the fundamental rules of firelighting is that you want to match the size of the flame, or the size of the spark, to your fuel. So the sparks from a fire steel like this are quite small. They're not, I wouldn't say that they're that cool. They are quite hot in terms of heat output, but they are small sparks. If you tried to set fire to a log using just a fire steel, you would be there forever, likely until you charred a hole in through and created your own tinder. So you want to match the size of the sparks to the size of fuel. So this will affect which tinders you use. But in general, most tinders will work with a fire steel if they are fine enough. So as long as you've got a fine tinder, and that's the main purpose and main aspect we look for in a tinder, is we're looking for fine materials that is flammable. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get on to our first tinder. So our first tinder is one that should be instantly recognizable to most of you, and that is cotton wool. This is a good entry-level tinder. It's easy to get it hold of. Most supermarkets will stock it. Obviously, it's not something we can harvest from the wild, so it doesn't have limits there, but easy to find, relatively easy to light, as long as it is nice and dry. So we can open our cotton wool pad like that, and we can tease apart the fluffy bits. Now I've had some struggles with this morning, just because I think it got a little bit damp in the box that I was storing it in. So hopefully we can get a good that. One quick spark, and there we go. You can see it lights pretty easily when it is, as I say, dry, but in general this is a really good entry level. With just a few sparks, you don't have to be that accurate. You can usually get it going quite quickly. But one of the drawbacks, as you can see, is that we didn't get a massive flame of that, or a lot of heat, and it's burnt down quite quickly. So let's take a look at a slightly different tinder. Now, as I just said, with cotton wool, it's not something that you can necessarily gather in environments, which, I mean, that's part of one of the tenets of bushcraft, is that you want a connection, particularly with children, to the source of the material. And we can kind of get around that a bit if we're just starting out by having them bring in some dry lint. This is just a waste product of the clothes drying process. At home, if you have a tumble dryer, you'll probably be pulling wads of this out. As long as there's some organic fibers in there, we can light this. A couple of sparks right into the middle of the bundle, and off it goes. So this is kind of a step above cotton wool in that you're involving the participants in the gathering of the material, and it's a bit more relevant to them. You can see it actually does last a good bit longer with a good pile, and we can get some heat out of it. It's not going to be the best, but it'll keep going for a while. So this is a kind of cotton wool step up. So there we go. That did burn for longer and is still smoking away at the side of it, but it's not really ideal for tinder. I mean, we can then use an extender with this, so something like birch bark, and carry on going. But as a single on its own tinder, it has its weaknesses. You've got to make sure that the material you put on here is going to be fine enough and dry enough to catch from that initial burst of heat, and you have to be really rapid on it, which is tricky. In wet and cold conditions, you're going to struggle a bit more with cotton wool and dry lint, unless there's, of course, you modify the material, say by soaking it in Vaseline or petroleum jelly. So this actually, I've recently found out, has the opposite effect to what you might expect. Well, it has the effect you might expect, but not for the reasons you think it does. So this tends to burn a whole lot longer. So if we soak a regular cotton wool ball in Vaseline, we can then pull some tufts off the side and light it, and it'll go. And so you think, well, okay, it's burning quite a long time, it's burning with quite a hot heat, that must be because of that petroleum jelly in there. But actually the petroleum jelly in this case is inhibiting the burning of the cotton wool. It's slowing the process down, similar to the way wax works with a wick. What you've got is your cotton wool, and that's then pulling and melting the Vaseline outside, and it burns for longer with more heat. So this is a nice little activity. You can get some Vaseline, get some wooden pegs, melt the Vaseline in a pot, and then dip the either the dry lint or the cotton wool buds in, and you can build a really good homemade fire starter. This is something fantastic to involve children in. If you use the dry lint, that means you kind of involving them in all of the steps to create their very own tinder, which they can then use in the future. I say really good. It is still going, and it is messy with my camera settings because I think it's so bright. Basically thinks we're at night, so it's flipping settings. So hopefully you can see that okay. And there's something quite mesmerizing about it. So that's great. So man-made materials have a distinct advantage in that you can prepare it ahead of time. For the busy forest school leader, this is really useful, because if you run 3-4 sessions a week, you don't necessarily have time to go out or the resources around you to gather everything from scratch. Obviously it's nice when you do, but for a quick and easy fire start and for introducing people to firelighting, it's really good because it starts getting the skills in there, builds that little bit of achievement, builds that sense of ownership in a skill before we move it further. So perfect, it's still going and will likely go for a little bit longer. So we'll let that burn out and then we'll jump in with the next tinder. So the more indigenous analog to cotton wool is going to be seed heads. So there's a few different plants that will yield a seed head that's appropriate for firelighting or good for firelighting. There's several. So most common ones are likely going to be cattail, thistle, which is this one, or rosebay willow herb. So all of those, find them. Generally end of summer is a good time to collect them, and going to look for a dense bundle of fibers. Now this is something that, of course, if you're gathering it from the wilds, you're going to have to probably, unless you are gathering it on a blazing hot day, need to dry it out somewhat. And the easiest way to do that is to get a little canvas pouch, put the seed heads in the canvas pouch, and then put that in a pocket close to your body. So somewhere where the heat from your body will dry it out gradually. Because these are very absorbent fibers, so if you gather them on a dewy morning, they will be damp and they will struggle. So yes, this is a great way to get people starting to connect with the environment, starting to connect the pieces, going, okay, well, we've practiced with cotton wool. What can we find as a substitute for cotton wool? What is light and fluffy and will light from a spark? So you can have your participants or your customers or whatever going out and gathering some of these and having a go themselves. It's like, okay, will this light? And sometimes it's nice just to open things up for experimentation. Go, okay, go find something, and don't prompt them on what they're looking for. Beyond, what are the properties of cotton wool? Let's see if we can find those same properties in nature. And they might find things like moss, and they'll really struggle with that unless it's absolutely baking dry. Or they may well find some seed heads, and we'll have a play around with that. If you think cotton wool goes up quickly, then you haven't really had a good look at seed heads. So we drop a spark into the center here. What you're seeing is a flash of heat and flame. So if someone's really confident in their firelighting, giving them some of these can sometimes throw them can throw them a bit. So because these do take a bit more effort to light, a bit more heat, a bit more control with our fire steels, and they also burn through a lot quicker. They are a challenge to use. Now, obviously the best way to use this is in the center of a tinder bundle. So you create a little bundle of dry grass, put that in there, and then add your ember to that. But failing that, what we're looking to do is we're looking to extend the life of this. So this is a nice one to play around with, but on its own, it's just not that good. So we want to use that heat and move it on to something else. Which brings us to our next tinder. Our next tinder is bark belonging to birch species. So in the UK we have our native silver birch, which has the white to grey bark with the horizontal markings. It's pretty distinctive. I do have a video on how to identify it if you really need. And what you're looking for there is either a dead birch where you can gather big sheets, or you're looking for these tiny little strips peeling off a live birch. Now you need to be careful that where you're stripping that, you're actually stripping bits that are already coming off, because you may well damage the tree or open it up to disease if you strip bits that will expose the live wood or the cambium. So that's one way to go. You can find silver birch in most woodlands. It is probably going to be your go-to resource if you're in the southern parts of the UK and you don't work in a pine woodland. So that is good. But a really handy find is if you're lucky enough to have this particular bark planted on your street by well-meaning council officers. This is the bark of Himalayan birch. It comes off really easily. It's a very white tree and very light white colored bark on the tree, and it comes off in massive sheets. And these sheets are papery thin. And this is perfect for either using on its own or as a tinder extender. So if we want to use this on its own, we'd rough up the fibers. Again, we want small thin fibers that we can then drop sparks onto. So I'm just going to create as many small pieces of surface area, because we want, the more surface area you have, the easier it will light from a fire steel. So let's go work with a small piece. There we go. See, that lights pretty well. It burns really well. And it'll keep going for a while on your pile. You can also mix small bits of those birch bark peelings into a mix of seed heads and light it that way. But as I said, it works really well on its own, and it's kind of that next step. It's going to take more effort than your cotton wools and your seed heads, but with proper preparation, it's something that you can really start to extend people's knowledge with, and this is something that can be gathered. So same thing with silver birch. Silver birch tends to be a little bit harder to light than our Himalayan birch. But we've got a few peelings here, and we'll go see about lighting those as well. This is really good if you can find silver birch, because again, you're extending it further, you're gathering stuff from the environment, you make it directly relevant. So it's a little harder to work with, as I said. I'm working with a very small bundle. There we go. Burns a bit longer than paper birch, and it's a really useful tinder to find. And if you see a peeling birch tree, you'll often get in the habit of walking past it and peeling it little bits and pieces. If you get a whole sheet of bark, then you can use like your knife or the strike on your fire steel just to rough up the fibers on there. This is a little bit difficult to do when you're working with children. This is more something that you'd teach adults, and only those that have competent enough knife skills and control that they're not going to cut themselves. Because to be honest, if you're holding it flat and then you're working with your knife blade in between your fingers there, it is really easy to slip, and I've cut myself multiple times like that. So teach good knife control first before you take them onto this particular method. Get them peeling strips instead. Get them using a big sheet of birch bark as a flame extender. So if you already have cotton wool going, putting a big roll of birch bark on top of there will supercharge it and keep it going for a lot longer. Moving on to our final tinder, and probably one of the harder ones to get hold of. And this is a brilliant long stick of fatwood, which is the resin soaked wood that you get from pine trees. Basically, often where a branch comes off a pine tree will seal that branch stub, there to prevent infection. They'll pump resin into there, and that is really highly flammable. So what you have is essentially something you can take shavings off, and then those shavings are like little resin soaked cotton wool balls. And this is fantastic wood if you can find it. Say it's a bit hit and miss. It's worth checking out the pine trees in your area, seeing whether any look good, sawing them close to the trunk and just seeing whether you can get a nubbin of fatwood out of there. These sticks, this one was gifted to me by a friend, thank you Martin. But essentially you can buy boxes of these online, and it may well be the way to go if you are looking at outfitting a whole group using these. But if you're just looking for yourself, then it really, and also as a demonstration, it's worth seeing whether you can gather it from your environment. This is again something that's more applicable the further north you go and the further you go into pine forests. So down south, birch is going to probably be your main tinder source, natural tinder source, but up north fatwood really comes into its own. As I said, what we want to do is we want to create a nest of those thinner curls. So you can either use the back or the blade of your knife, and you're going to take really thin shavings off. The thinner the better. Now if you are working with younger groups or people that you haven't quite got to the knife skills yet, then you can use anything that has a bit of a sharp edge to it. So really nice thing that you can use is the striker from your fire steel. You can actually, with a bit of pressure, build up a nice pile like that. I'm just going to slice that off. Now if you are not using a really nice stick like this, chances are you're going to get a lot finer a pile, and the real challenge here is going to be lighting it without moving any of the, without dispersing all of the fibers. So when you create your neat little pile, the last thing you want to do is knock it everywhere as you strike. So you just want to be really careful. But yeah, just a firm strike down. So we've got a bit of smoke and a bit of, and there we go. And that burns really nicely. I do like the way it goes up, and it's really nice. It's something that I've found in Scotland in the pouring rain, and it has saved our skins by letting us get a fire going and really made things a whole lot more comfortable. So a really good thing to get used to, particularly if you're south of the border and you haven't encountered it more often. See whether you can find any. There's probably going to be a pine forest somewhere close by to you, and then have a play with this fantastic little tinder. Well, I hope that has given you some ideas on how you can take learning further with the tinders that you use. Like I say, it's going to be a progression, and it's going to be a progression for you as well as the learners that you're working with. So just think about what is the easiest way, where can we start and get that sense of achievement that can then build confidence so that they can start failing, to be honest. So you don't want to start off a learner, particularly now with children who are very worried about failing. You don't want to start them off straight away with, okay, this is you're going to fail at this. You want to start building that confidence in themselves, the self-esteem, so they can start moving forward. And then once they've got a couple of fires underneath their belt and they know they can do it, they know they can make a fire, then you can start introducing things that are a bit more difficult, because they've got almost like that reserve, that proof that I am good enough to then push them forward, to push them through the inevitable troubles. Because some of these tinders are trickier to use. You saw me take a couple of strikes to get there, and my technique isn't perfect. I'm still working on it as a thing, but it's looking about that progression. Is okay, can we move things forward? Can we then challenge later on? So start off with cotton wool, there's nothing wrong with that. But in the end, if you're looking at serious bushcraft skills, you want to be able to use the natural resources around you, build that connection to the land, and that's where some of those other natural tinders that you can find come in. So we may well do an extended version of this where we look at tinder funguses and tinder bundles and all of that, so look out for that in the future. And I just want to say a big thank you to Wellness Woodlands for making this video possible and allowing me to film on their absolute gem of a site. If you're looking for a woodland campsite over in the Shropshire Kidderminster area, I can highly recommend this. It's a beautiful site. There's always so much to see and do, and every time I turn a corner I find a nice little detail that just shows how much thought has gone into this site. So if you're looking for a campsite with a difference that will also give you easy access to the wire forest and over into the Shropshire Hills, I can thoroughly recommend Wellness Woodlands. I'll leave a link to their website in the description. Thanks for watching, and remember, make the most of every day.